Okay, well, we're on. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I am Swapna Samuel. I have the privilege of heading the FinOps practice and the Clarity Business Management team at BMO. And joining me on stage is...
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Natasha. I'm the director of the Cloud FinOps team at BMO. So with that, let's dive right in.
Okay, so quick show of hands, just for my understanding. How many of you here on the room are predominantly tech? Okay. How many of you in the room are predominantly finance? Nice. How many of you are in between, a merge of both, not sure? Okay, perfect. I love that. I love that. So don't worry about it. I'm predominantly tech finance. Natasha is finance tech. So between the two of us, I think this is going to be really fun. What we will do is talk through the key four bucket items that we're looking at for the agenda. The first thing what we want to do is, whoa, there you go. Nice. The first thing we want to do is talk about why this matters. Why does business value matter? We're going to look through three key components, one being the business driver, the business case, and then the business value. The second, what we're going to be talking about is how best can we support an apples-to-apples comparison? What does that mean? The third, the fun part, why does AI and GenAI complicate this whole thing? And of course, the meat of it all is the how. What does a framework in action really look like? So let's dive into this. Why it matters. So right here on screen, you can see three links very tightly coupled. The first being the business driver, the second being the business case, and the third being the business value. Now, the way I like to think about an initiative is kind of like a road trip. So stay with me here. The business driver is kind of like the why. Why am I going? The business case is the how. How am I getting there? What's the route? What's the plan? How much do I have for fuel? And the business value is, what did I gain through the journey? What am I getting at the destination? And so if you keep that example in mind, without the driver, I'm basically aimless. Without the case, I'm basically inefficient. And without the value, well, why go? And so these three things are very important. There was a paper that I recently read that spoke about the lost value in cloud programs. And in that paper, they basically described the reason for lost value coming down to three key reasons. The first one is unrealized use cases, where the focus was so much on cost savings that people neglected the new value that was being brought up. The second, cloud sprawl, and the third, stalled adoption. So needless to say, I'm sure everyone here agrees, these three things really matter. So let's get into cloud business drivers. So this is a reference from AWS. We've kept the link referenced here, so as you take a picture, you can go back to the source. Now, there could be many reasons for wanting to go to the cloud, whether it's a migration or a new build. More than often, you're going to see the reasons fall into one of these 6 buckets. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, but you can see that it typically tends to fall into one of these. And again, the reasons for wanting to build in your cloud could be one or many. So it doesn't just have to be one thing. I could be going to cloud because I want to cost save. And also, let's say, for example, I want to improve my security and operational resilience. Let's go with that. Say that's my reason. That's my business driver for going to cloud. Well, if the reason why I'm going to cloud is to improve that kind of resilience, guess what I'll be measuring? My mean time to detect, my mean time to respond. The driver and the why dictates the what. If I don't know the why, what really am I measuring to find out where am I going? Am I doing it right? And that's why it's very important to make sure that those business drivers are captured and it's there for everyone to see.
So with business driver in mind, let's talk about business value. So business value is something very central to what we do here at FinOps. You have heard through the keynotes in terms of business value articulation. And in our context, it could be savings from optimization activities or improved efficiencies from automation and faster speed to market enabled for cloud. So we want to be able to measure and communicate this business value to different personas. And what is really critical here as well is making sure that your business value really reflect what is most important to your organization, be it cost reduction, improved efficiency, or even addressing security or compliance risk. And one thing that we often neglect is business value is always quantifiable in terms of financials, but business value here actually encompasses both tangible and intangible elements. So with that in mind, as FinOps professional, we do need to translate the cloud usage data and cost information into meaningful insights that can actually connect directly into the elements of the business value. So let's take a look in terms of some of the examples of business value in cloud. The first one being cost reduction. So how many of you here, your organization moved to cloud with the promise of lower costs? And many of us know that might not always be the case. And for those who are successful to have this cost reduction at the get-go, it is truly viable if we actually do the right thing. So reducing IT cost infrastructure is one of the primary drivers, but that's not where the value conversation ends. With cloud, there's also come with improved operational efficiencies, where developers can reduce their development cycle, having faster speed to market in terms of access to environment at a quicker pace and accelerating DevOps. And in terms of enhanced customer experience, so this is where things like AI may come into play. So having access to cloud AI, using automated chatbot to improve customer experience is one of the example of business driver in cloud. And last but not least is in terms of reduction of business risk. So what we mean here is it could be governance risk, financial risk, or even vendor lock-in risk. So using cloud solution, you have the availability of choosing multiple vendors, as well as multi-region deployments to help minimize some of the business operational risks.
Nice. So we heard about the driver, we've heard about the value. So let's look at them side by side to just make sure we get that in perspective, right? So the driver we know is, if you look at it from a definition perspective, it's the motivation, it's the why. Why am I doing this? The business value, like we saw, is the actual outcome or the benefits realized from that initiative. And if you go next. Clicker's working, right?
Yeah, it's just the delay.
Yeah. So the focus from a business driver, again, is forward-looking, right? I'm looking forward to see why am I going, what's happening here. The business value, again, is looking back. Like, what have I achieved? Now, from a timing perspective, we typically tend to identify these business drivers when we're looking at our strategy very, very early on in the game. Now, the business value, though, we start measuring that pretty early in the development. If we look at the example that we were talking about, if I'm looking at my mean time to detect or mean time to response, then I'm looking at that while I'm in my dev cycles, because then I'm saying, am I getting to what I need? Are there any architectural changes that I need to make? Are there any other new dependencies that have come up that could impact my response times? Or is there something new that's come up in the architecture stack that I can actually accelerate more and I need to revamp my business case and all of that good stuff, right? And so that's going to be like a lot more early on, start measuring, start checking, and going forth. And then the nature of it, the driver is very strategic. Here's the reason why I'm going. The business value, we're going to try our best to measure it into tangible results. Now, don't get me wrong. Business value has both tangible and intangible benefits to it. But what we're trying to say here is write it down. The things that can be measured, we want to measure. And the things that can't be measured, that are a little like up there, it still needs to be documented and be part of this story. And then if you're looking for a simple example, say my business driver's agility. The way I would look at my business value then is, say, 40% faster deployment times. There you go, right? That's the story we want to try and tell.
So with the alignment of cloud business drivers and business value, let's discuss how we actually tie in cloud business driver with ROI. So cloud adoption is no longer just a technical move. we do need to tie in with strategic business goals. And whether we like it or not, financials is what drive things. So to truly realize the value of cloud, we need to align our cloud investment with the right business decisions and drivers to measure them accordingly. So we often hear that cost alone does not equal to value, but that's why FinOps pushes unit economics versus total spend. By identifying which business driver matters most to your business, you're able to have that rightful conversation with them to really help demonstrate ROI in terms that the business actually recognizes and acknowledges. So in terms of how do we actually connect business value and quantify it, is looking at it holistically, because true business value is only recognizable if it's complete and accurate. And how we accomplish this is by leveraging the total cost of ownership. So what you see on the slide here is essentially the 4 big building blocks of what make up a most common TCO. Direct costs, indirect costs, hidden costs, and our favorite long-term costs. So in terms of direct costs, this is something that's very visible, very attributable, like your cloud bill, something that where most cost analysis ends. But this is technically where the business value conversation truly happens and gets started. And when we look at things like indirect costs, your support team, your shared infrastructure, this is where you need to find ways to allocate the indirect costs to give you the full picture, because if not, these costs do impact your bottom line, even though they don't come directly into your TCO view. And hidden costs, shadow IT. This is where things like your over-provision resources sneak in, your double bubble cost comes in, that needs to be articulated. And I don't know how many of you, through the maturity lifespan of your cloud journey, has reached a point where, yes, we're investing in cloud, but guess what? All this cloud bill is building up into your ongoing run costs. And justifying budget increases in run costs is something that all of us have to manage. So taking into account what the long-term maintenance costs or run costs, depending on what your organization coined them to be, is going to be an important element in terms of articulating what the TCO looks like. So a comprehensive TCO perspective will enable us to articulate and measure business value. And this is not just an accounting exercise. It's actually a tool that everyone can use to really help set up the foundation for smart and sustainable. And by sustainable here, I don't mean like green ops, but sustainable from a long-term cost perspective to inform decision making. And what truly ties this together in terms of business driver, total cost of ownership, and business value is our good old business case. And I know some of you sitting here will be like, why are you talking to me about business cases here? Most of you will be familiar about this precious piece of paperwork that anyone has to do to secure funding for any investment you like to make. But in the most foundational sense, most of the time when you talk to your finance folks, they're very focused on just the financial component. What is my ROI? What is my IRR that you get from this investment? What we want to be able to do here is to really shift the narrative, to really build out a comprehensive business case, taking the holistic approach for any of your cloud migration or net new initiative to really start telling what the true cloud story entails. So as you can see on this slide here, it's a traditional business case, but just like FinOps Plus is business case plus plus. So what we're having here is taking the financial lens from the ROI view, but also layering in terms of what are some of the non-financial stuff that you can layer in terms of value for cloud that's being captured by various KPIs, and using the intangibles to really tie in the long-term strategic goal here to help tell the comprehensive business case, not just to invest in cloud, but to give a clear path into measurable success.
So if any of you guys have been in discussions when people are talking about, should we move to the cloud? Should we stay on-prem? More than often, you're going to hear these schools of thought where someone's going to say, well, guess what? The cost of doing nothing is way greater, and the value we'll get if we stay where we are is going to be less. Is that true? Potentially. Another school of thought, well, shouldn't true values maximize when I bring the best of both worlds together? Why not have a hybrid application where I have some components on cloud and some on-prem? Valid use case? Potentially. The question is, how do we know? We won't know until we have that business case. And I think that's what is important to ensure. We're not going by opinions, we're going by data. Again, we're not trying to get perfect, right? We've heard this over and over again. If you've been here coming to the FinOps X, you've heard this like umpteen number of times. We're not trying to get perfect, but we're trying to get as close to as much information we have. Understanding every organization has its issues with data, but as much as we can bring together to make that informed decision, that's basically where we want to go. And so in order to get that true holistic view, one of the things we have to be careful about, and like we've been emphasizing, is value. So we need to measure not just the cost of staying status quo, but the cost of staying status quo plus what's the value that I'm getting if I stay where I am. And then compare that to not just the cost of migration, but the cost of migration plus value. Because that's what's really going to support an apples to apples comparison. And that's where we want to go. How best can we go to supporting an apples to apples comparison? And I like to use that phrase, how best, because that's honestly what it's going to be. Based on how much information we have, based on the quality of data we have, based on how high in the sky the idea really is at that point in time, we need to take a very realistic approach to saying, how best can I support this apples to apples comparison so that our leaderships can now make an informed decision, a well-rounded one. And so when we look at our current on-prem costs, the big rock items are typically easy enough, right? We know our storage, our network, facilities, all of that good stuff. We need to ensure we also take into account incremental spend. So any extended support that may come up, cost of refreshes, all of those pieces need to be added on. And again, not just that, but what is the value that I'm getting from staying on-prem? And the reason for saying that is, say, for example, if I did all of this costed a couple of $1 million plus the support, and I would get, say, 4 features. It's good. That's good value. And if I did do the migration, and we'll look at all the migration costs that are there, so whether I'm refactoring, doing a lift and shift, take all of those pieces into account, plus or minus any additional benefit costs and benefits, right? So training, any other, let's say, cost savings, operational efficiencies, double bubble costs at some point in time where I'm running both my on-prem and cloud, looking at that whole picture, and then, like we said, value. Now, maybe when I go to cloud, I'll get 7 or 10 or 15 features. The question is, do I need those 15 features? What is the value, right? And I think that's where the driver always comes into play. Why am I going? How? What does this comparison really look like? And let's look at it with value on both sides of the equations, taking into account, like Natasha mentioned, all of these hidden costs so that we can get the best version of an apples to apples comparison. So now that we've gotten those foundational pieces out of the way, why does AI and GenAI complicate the ROI analysis? So easy one, upfront, costs are harder to predict. We know that. Our training costs, our inference costs, the different pricing models that keep coming, you think they'll be static. They keep getting as complicated as some of the AI models themselves. So that's one. The next are ecosystem complexity. So whether it's data lakes, feature stores, our vector database, our API gateways, the endless number of SKUs that keep getting added. That's always fun. And the third one is actually my favorite, attribution problems. So either the services are not natively taggable, or if they are, there are so many shared components that are there where I'm trying to figure out who's consuming what, the models are here, some of my layers might be here. I'm trying to ensure there's no deduplication, like what's going on with all of this, right? And so there is that added complexity when we're trying to do this with AI or GenAI use cases. So just to give us a perspective again, so if we go to the next slide, again, this is a super simplified version, but I think it helps get us into perspective of why this differs and why it takes a little bit of extra love and care as we look at our AI or GenAI applications. So let's look at the example. A simple cloud data warehouse and then a GenAI powered assistant. So if I was looking at business value, traditional data warehouse, I love how we say cloud and traditional quite a bit in this term. I have a reporting analyst. A reporting analyst needs access to be able to run reports and dashboards. Boom, I've got that. Speed to insights. How soon is the data refreshed? How soon can they get the information that they want? Great, easy to measure. GenAI powered data assistant, we have non-technical resources accessing the info. Did they ask the right question? Did they get the right answers? How really was it useful to them? It's a little harder to quantify in the very least. Looking at total cost of ownership now, that gets even more fun. Relatively, cloud data warehouses a lot more easier to predict. Like I know the storage, I know the query costs, I know concurrency, just to name a few, right, of the things. Fairly predictable, I'm good. GenAI powered data assistants, the prompts, the inferences, any embedding generations, the vector databases, any guardrails that maybe someone forgot to put in and we never knew based on how creative some of the users can actually get. That's always fun. And then ROIs, of course, usually calculated based on cost savings, speed of insights, productivity gains, all of those pieces a lot more easier. And again, with the GenAI powered assistant, a lot more difficult to quantify, especially if I try going and saying, hey, get me a report that shows me all my savings from this, and I get a number, I look at it, and then I go to Natasha and I say, do you mind running this report for me and doing the calculations and telling me if those numbers match? I basically double bubble my costs. And that's why it gets complicated when you're trying to do the ROI. And this is the most simplified version, right? And typically when you're looking at our AI or GenAI applications, they're a lot more bigger, a lot more complex. So just from that perspective to help us get into key with that.
Yeah, so with the what and the why covered up, I know we spent quite a lot of time on definition, but I'm sure everyone here can kind of agree that speaking the same language will really help drive your point through a lot more efficiently with all the different persona that we interact with. And in terms of learning about business value, total cost of ownership, business casing, how do we actually put this together, leveraging the FinOps principle, is tying in the different scopes that we have, the domains, interaction with different personas, and the intersection between different disciplines that wraps everything up together in terms of the output that FinOps is trying to drive here. And the way our organization is leveraging FinOps and driving the point of business value out to our business user group is the integration of FinOps with technology business management. So as our organization is shifting into a more product-centric delivery model, there's a growing pressure for us to understand costs in those same terminology as well. We not only need to demonstrate business value, that includes technology spend, we need to do so in a way that the respective business unit actually understand what it is, so that technology cost is not just a black box. So to do so, we have actually integrated TBM into the FinOps framework to really help connect the dots. We can bring together the financial accountability through FinOps and the strategic clarity leveraging the TBM construct in a product-led organization that we're migrating towards. And how we actually weave these two pieces together. So FinOps will bring about the lens of cost, real-time reporting, accuracy, as well as accountability and optimization of cloud spend. And this allowed the teams to actually track things like unit economics for GPU hours, token usage, and inform trade-off between different product decisions. And where TBM comes in here is really layering on a structured language and taxonomy that align the spend to our business construct and capabilities. And this truly helped us to frame our technology spend in terms of business outcome and allow the leadership to start seeing spend in terms of the services they provide, the different business unit, and not just as raw technology costs that they can't tie back to their product line. So when we actually combine FinOps together with TBM, it gives us both the operational agility, cost transparency, and also the strategic lens in terms of how the business value can be articulated. So as you can see on the slide here, so we can actually now speak the terms of allocating the LLM inference costs, the FinOps term, in terms of aligning it to the customer experience AI platform, which is really one of the service line that we have under the digital channel business unit. So by aligning the different various components will help us tell the cost story more effectively. And on to Swapna's favorite slide.
Yeah, you're saying this is my favorite because I used the same thing last year when we were talking about chargeback models, but it still holds true. So we know the saying that says neither does one size fit all, but also neither does one style, right? And I think that's key. Like I love high ankle tops. I'm still wearing those. Those are fun. But that's really what it's going to come down to when we're trying to talk about what your business case looks like, how are you handling your attributions, and how you want to show that story. I think the principles of it basically remain the same, right? We want to show the full picture. We want to know the driver, because if that's not captured, when we're showing the success of what's been delivered, was that really the intent of what I wanted when I started off? A lot gets lost, at least from what we've seen. We said, this is what we wanted, and then you see 5 other shiny things, and then you go like, oh wait, what is the reason for why I started this in the first place to begin with? And there's a huge cost component to it, right? It's kind of like marketing strategies when you go to stores. You know, they have all the nice stuff at the end or at the beginning when you go. And there's a saying they say, right? Never go shopping when you're hungry for food. It's a bad idea. Kind of like this. So there are so many things that can influence. People are human, and what we want to do is remove that emotional component so that rational decisions can really be made. And so this is what I like to call the FinOps mix. Again, this is just a few snippets of what we do. Again, we are fairly regulated as an organization, so there's limitations with how much we can put on a slide. But I hope the principles of what we are showing do reign loud and true, and you're able to take from it. So, like Natasha mentioned, leveraging the TBM taxonomy has worked well for us because what it does is enables us to map our costs to business capability, which is really important because when we're looking at leadership and exec or product owners type view, I'm not going to impress them by saying, guess what? I can run 100,000 transactions in this. They're going to say, show me what's the value that I'm giving. How can I tie it back? How can I tie it back to a service? How can I tie it back to a capability, customer experience? What is it that I'm delivering, right? So the TBM taxonomy helps you make that alignment between your costs to your business capability, which has worked really well for us. The next aspect of this mix is leveraging the ever-going evolution of things that are available to us to bring clarity to our costs. One example that we put here is the application inference profiles from AWS, right? So again, it's not the solve-all, but it does help certain model types, at least from what we've seen, enable us to say which departments are making which workload inferences. So even if they're using the same models, we can use the inference profiles to kind of give us that delineation to get which departments are pulling and then get those cost divides. Does it solve every case scenario? No. Are there some costs that can't be? Absolutely. And that's why it all boils down to what is the policy or the methodology that you are looking to adopt for your organization, right? Like in our case, we do use a mix of quite a few variations, right? So one is cases that we can tag, we do it. Cases that we know you can make those inferences by consumer base. Like we said, the application inference profile is one example. We leverage that. Other cases where we can't, do we peanut butter it based on overall footprint, or do I do an even divide? We do have a classification of some of our applications that we decide which model type it is more aligned to. We have a chargeback framework, and so we look at our applications, align it to the chargeback framework, and say, okay, you fit this model, and therefore this is what we're going to apply to you. That's basically how we try to do it, right? And again, leveraging our cost categories that are available, leveraging cost pools. So it is a mix of it. We do take business mappings from Cloudability to our advantage as well. So it is quite a few things. So if you're hoping to say, here's the solution that fits everything, then no. But can we use a mix of everything that we have to get really close to what we want? Absolutely. And it does come down to each of our discretions and with the team and your leadership group as well to know where is that fine balance between value and granularity. And that's something that only you will be able to discern owing to the nature of the application, owing to the nature of that specific product, to say, is this worth splitting hairs about, or am I good with this aspect being an even split, right? So having this mix is how we found it working best for us. Our business drivers, our business case, continuously doing those measures, understanding that it's always going to be a FinOps mix in it.
Yeah, and as Swapna has kind of mentioned, we do have an allocation framework, but just as we know, it's always ever-changing. So our framework continues to evolve, and I think that's one thing as FinOps practitioner, is to continue evaluating our business process, enhancing it, and finding optimization where possible. So with that, we've come to our last slide here, but before we wrap, what we want to really kind of wrap up here and leave you with is the understanding that when we look at cloud investment, it's not really a one-time exercise. It really involves a life cycle of iterative continuous delivery cycle and steps. And this cycle that we kind of show here has 3 key stages, and one building on top of the other. And the first one, starting with us building a comprehensive case to justify why we're doing what we're doing. And that includes the identification of your cloud business driver that will help drive both your tangible and intangible benefits, and establishing the measures up front. So what I mean by this is we have a case, but sometimes, and we all know that a business case gets you the funding. But in order for us to hold teams accountable by establishing the measures with those involved, will help us agree on what are we keeping ourselves accountable for both financial and non-financial dimension. And lastly, having a mechanism for benefits tracking. Benefits tracking is a black box on its own. I think we can have an entire white paper on benefits tracking here, but as FinOps practitioner, one thing that we can help do better as well is really provide the governance and the accountability driving force here to help teams be accountable for what they promised the cloud promised to be. And what we have here is essentially a circular loop where teams will start evolving from building the holistic business case, establishing the measures, and tracking benefits to really help us translate from perceived value of cloud to realized value of cloud. And this includes things like the regular business review with your stakeholders. Think of things like dashboards as well as other means of email reporting that can help keep the teams engaged and continuously informed to have this investment cycle continuous. And if we think about it this way in terms of planting a seed and making sure that, hey, I said this investment will yield X return, and showcasing the return and building that trust to facilitate the next investment conversation. So this is why going through this life cycle exercise is not just about building the one-time approval to go ahead and invest in the spend, but it's also building the trust to keep expanding on your cloud migration journey. So with these 3 steps, justification, measurement, and benefit realization, when they're all tied together, we don't just manage cloud costs. We actually start managing cloud value. And that's something that is really understated when we look at cloud initiatives. So that's the mindset shift that we need to start shifting the narrative from just cost management to value management to really help drive the progression in terms of cloud.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. For more FinOps X 2025 content, go check out our YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and leave comments and questions for all of our wonderful speakers. We appreciate your support.